Hello, and welcome back, most illustrious members of the Detail. I'm your host D, also known as MTF Doom, also known as D. Kain Ruby-Omen when I'm writing. And today is something special. If you're here for Snap content, take this one off or listen along. But I'm today recording a short story that I wrote a little while ago. So, some trigger warnings ahead of time. It does involve capital punishment. It is a sci-fi short story about what a future where everyone's needs are met would look like in terms of what punishment would even entail. What crimes would even matter in such a world. So, it does involve a murder. Keep yourself safe if that topic is going to be not good for your mental health. And I will see you on the other side of the intro with the EMP. I hope you enjoy. The EMP by D. Kain Ruby-Omen. I knew, of course, somewhere down in the dark where the thought had originated, that I'd get caught. Logically, there was simply no getting around this truth. In the year 2555, there was no crime, large or small, that one could commit without getting caught, nor, really, was there a need to commit a crime in the first place. And my crime was as large as they came. I knew all that. The man didn't have to die, but I wanted to know what it felt like. Obsessively, I needed to know. And while escaping capture was impossible, I wanted to see how long it would take before the inevitable. Disappointingly short had been the answer, despite my best efforts. I had stalked the victim for weeks, making sure he was like me, no close friends checking in on him, no family to be seen. I didn't know him. It was better that way. A stranger caught in a conspiracy for murder. I had given my monthly allotment of drink credits to the housing complex drunk to spend on the night of the murder, so my location would be repeatedly pinged at the local watering hole, creating an alibi for more than enough time. And finally, I hadn't run. Suddenly moving across planet or off-world was a dead giveaway. No, I would bide my time. The news as much a shock to me as anyone. I had acquisitioned the murder weapon 6 months prior, a meat cleaver requested alongside paperwork showing my enrollment in artisanal butchery classes, large enough, I hoped, to sever his spine and therefore his on-link vitals before the authorities were alerted. Alive to dead, as if he had never existed. This ended up being the only part I would regret in the moment. In my mind, the act had been drawn out and methodical. The reality was quick and messy, and I needed a shower. Not 2 hours, and 1 shower removed from the act had the citizens' militia knocked on my door, weapons drawn. Non-lethal, but I'd heard they hurt something ferocious. Non-lethal, but the outcome would be the same. Everyone present knew it. Why not simply bring the lethal weapons in the first place and save everyone the trouble? I knew why, of course. There was no need for any one person to go through that most heinous act of taking a life except me, and now, at the end of things, I'd have mine taken by a cold machine. These executions always made the news. Why'd they do it? Why didn't anyone stop them? If the authority knew ahead of time, why was nothing done? We're too soft on crime. All the same rallying cries for the past 1,000 years. It all changes and it all stays the same. The truth is that they had tried to stop me in a roundabout, bureaucratic way. Before I even knew what I would do, probably, I had been getting pop-ups in the corners of my vision asking about my mental state, offering to make appointments and treatment plans, and I had closed them all out. Insisted that I had read all my options for 3 therapy sessions and opted out of further inquiry. I didn't want help. I wanted to feel a life, leave a body, and I got what I wanted. The trial was short. The evidence overwhelming and damning, and me unable and unwilling to mount a defense of my actions. video from 6 different vantages inside the victim's home, plus a gruesome first-person view extracted from his brain that caused the court to adjourn for a break before anyone present lost their breakfast. Apparently, I had not severed his spine after all. The verdict was in before lunch. Death. No surprises, and for me, no more sunrises, the process so expedited I would be vaporized before the day was up. I had watched videos of the act in preparation. The chamber was just as I had seen on Link. Gray-green walls of such smooth metal that once the officiant cuffed my leg shackles to the heavy plastic ring in the center of the floor and the door closed behind him, the outline of it ceased to be. Around the room at eye level, a solid black line that the light would come from, flooding the room and vaporizing me between 2 heartbeats. Thump. I stand here and begin to count heartbeats. I know I'm supposed to reflect, but I cannot fathom on what. How should I have done things differently to avoid this small end? Thump. A low hum begins, and I wonder if my one sibling and one living parent will see this on the news. If that's how what is left of the people who may care about me will learn of my demise. Or if the system, in its infinite wisdom and near omniscience, has already told them in the mathematically perfect way to minimize their suffering. Thump. The hum is louder, and a static crackle fills the chamber with the smell of ozone. Thump. The light that signals my demise turns on, flooding the chamber with yellow. I can feel the oily light crawling over my skin and into my sinuses, and I can taste it. I shut my eyes tight, but the light seems to know and dims to a sickly green that filters through my bolted eyelids. The light floods my brain with images of a million lives. The highlights. Weddings on cool summer evenings, beaches bathed in near blinding sunlight, the first successful attempt at riding a bike without training wheels, leaving the atmosphere and looking back at the world from a space shuttle as it grows into a distant speck among an endless sea of distant specks, the taste of fruits and meats and drinks so real the oily taste of yellow light is replaced for a moment until the horrific. Being the victim of a violent and needless murder, watching your best friend drive away to start their life over somewhere too far to visit like you used to, both of you knowing it signals the end of the friendship that was, messy divorce in stuffy courts, the children all either on the brink of tears or weeping openly, their futures suddenly uncertain, and then the same view again, but from each child's perspective, wondering how you'll ever recover from the rock bottom you've dug yourself to until the mundane. The nights where sleep won't come because you're slightly hungry and slightly anxious, and nothing bad will happen if sleep never comes, but you still wish it would. Long days and the summer heat and humidity where the air conditioning is kicked, little paper cups of ice water, your only reprieve from the heat and the boredom and the endless hours of data entry, followed by going home to follow no dreams, then sleep and repeat, the endless cycle of which I experience so much more than the others that it nearly drowns out all those experiences, and I wonder if this is some final punishment until thump. Something's wrong. The last thump was supposed to be the finale. The machine has misfired or spared me. And then darkness. I wake up in a sterile room the color of my childhood. Someone who is clearly trying to look like a doctor if she isn't one is sitting across from me. She's in her 50s, maybe early 60s, gray hair shaved down to expose skin around the sides of her head, with the majority of her length bundled up in a neat bun on top. I expect her to say, "Oh, you're awake," like this is some kind of a cutscene. It feels fake. I think I'm dead. Instead, she offers me a hand to shake. I'm Dr. Gus. Her grip is firm and polite. I'm sure you have a lot of questions. The mention of questions floods my head with them as some primal Pavlovian response, and my eyes must give that away. I am still unable to vocalize, as though I have spent a long time asleep, and my body isn't ready for function that high just yet. She starts answering without my asking. You aren't dead. You didn't experience every human life that has ever happened, but you got over 100,000, and you're free to leave at any time. She smiles and looks down at her notebook, reading little reminders of what she's supposed to say. Those are the big ones. people usually ask when they wake up. Should I keep going, or would you like to direct the flow of conversation from here? Still, I can't seem to speak. Overwhelmed, I nod for her to continue. I'll listen and learn and bide my time to escape, except I'm free to go? Something about freedom itself escapes me right now. Where would I even go? Surely everyone knows what I did by now. Surely there was no life for me outside these walls? This isn't a cell, it's a luxury apartment. All right, she lets out a little laugh from the back of her throat and continues. So you went through what we call the realizer, but what the other people who have gone through it call the EMP, empathy, machined perfection. In a couple of weeks, it will take full effect, and you'll be unable to perceive yourself as a singularity. It's something akin to ego death, I've heard. You will feel a deep connection to all living things, and you will be unable to harm. Why? I cut her off, suddenly unable and ruthlessly compelled to speak. Which why? Why did we do this to you? Why don't we do it to everyone? Why did we make you believe you were going to die? All of them. Well, the first is obvious, I think. We did it to you so you wouldn't hurt anyone else. Second, we don't do it to everyone because when we designed it, we decided it was too akin to eugenics to limit the experience of humanity in that way. It means that some tiny fraction of people die every couple of years in horrible, violent ways to people like you. She realizes how pointed that was, I think, and tries to smile. It feels forced. But we decided that trade-off to be worth it, so the vast, overwhelming majority of people could have that genuine human experience. And the final answer, why we had to make you think you were going to be executed, was to keep that secret from the world. We've done away with the actual executions, but the simulations we ran told us a hard truth. The world simply behaved better if the prospect of death for truly terrible crimes was still there. The threat alone carries lots of people towards recovery before it's too late. You and everyone else that's been through the realizer, as well as everyone who developed it, resides permanently on this island, cloaked from the outside world, funded covertly, and completely secluded. Your onlink has been disabled, you won't send or receive messages digitally, and you won't be punished further. Any questions? I don't think so, I respond, my reality somehow more shattered now than right before my death. There is one more thing. The smile, genuine or false, has now totally dropped from her face. It's a grim business, but the machine you thought you were walking into before, it does exist. It's here on the island, and it's free for you to use if you find this existence unbearable. It's totally voluntary, though, but I need to warn you there is no second island. If you enter that machine, you will not wake up in another apartment with another scientist. You will enter the afterlife in whatever capacity that means to you. She stands to leave. Wait, I mutter without looking up. You implied you were one of the scientists who designed this whole thing, but we've been using it for hundreds of years. How is that possible? Another of those knowing smiles. It's part of the effects of the machine that we've worked into the punishment. It's a feature, not a bug, you see, that it dramatically extends your life expectancy. I put myself through the prototype. It didn't have all the desired effects, but I'd like to think it made me a better person. She gives me a sly wink. And I think it'll make you a better person. All due respect, but it's abnormal behavior to act like you did out there. Yeah, I respond weakly, shame crawling into the corners of my thoughts, maybe even guilt. This person perceives me with contempt, and I don't like it. For the first time ever, I think. She is gone now, and I sit alone in the empty apartment, the color of childhood, trying to banish the thoughts that have begun bubbling into existence behind my eyes, watery. It is unbearable, and it is only going to get worse. The doctor, scientist, warden has made that clear. Besides, I was resigned to my fate before. I will double down and enter the machine again and face the oily, pale, yellow light of judgment. I leave the apartment into a well-lit hall the color of spring sunsets. 9 other doors dot the hall on either side at long intervals. Plenty of elbow room, no neighborly toes to step on. The exit from the hall is marked clearly, and the glass door beneath the sign reveals a staircase spiraling up around a constantly cycling lift. I enter the stairwell, and cool, fresh air hits my lungs for the first time in... How long was I out? Before the trial, certainly, but the realizer had knocked me out for an indeterminate amount of time. What planet was I on? Dr. Scientist Warden Gus had mentioned an island, but she hadn't mentioned an Earth island. Was I on one of the colony planets on the fringes of the galaxy, safely tucked into some corner to be forgotten by time? It didn't seem so. The Earth moon and the Earth sun were out doing that thing they do where they're both simultaneously visible in the day sky to vie for your attention. I step off the lift and the grass closes up behind me, any trace of the underground apartment complex, the childhood-colored cells vanishing like the door to the realizer. It seems like Earth, but if we were cloaked from the outside world, what was stopping them from projecting anything onto the same cloak inside? In fact, I think, speaking in the darkest part of the self, cold logic and self-interest taking over again, the return to form I need to calculate and escape. In fact, who was to say the EMP here wasn't a portal back? Perhaps it was a test, like everything in life, of resolve and humility. Yes, that was surely it. Once you learned your lesson and showed all the parents that you were a good kid, you were allowed to leave. Just show them you were willing to die for your sins and homeward bound. I picked up the pace, my walk more a merry gallop down the cobblestone pathways that crisscrossed the prison. I had it all figured out, one step ahead of the game, as always. The EMP was easy to find, pathways leading through trees and rocks and all manner of unnatural artisanal foliage seemed to lead to it. The tall grass and tree line broke suddenly, and there, atop a slight hill, was the jade egg of my freedom. Removed from the arteries and fat that it was housed in back in the courthouse, and standing alone as it was, I found it somewhat more imposing. The silence in the clearing struck me now. The bird calls and breezes and insects had stopped, surely a choice made by the doctor, scientist, warden to instill dread, as if nothing lives here. But that wasn't true. There came a tittering as I approached, a distinctly human sound. I stopped halfway between the tree line and the EMP and looked around. I am not alone. So focused I was on my salvation that I hadn't seen human figures all along the edge of the clearing, maybe 100 sets of eyes, all cold and low and smiling dull. The tittering from behind me began speaking, and it talked in esoteric riddles. We spoke the same language, but the meaning didn't match any understanding that I could comprehend. They spoke of inescapable truths and omens, and when I turned to them, I realized that I recognized them twofold. The literal, that I had seen them enter that horrible machine on Link. I had watched them scream and belittle their captors, spit and sputter until the oily light took them, and I recognized them in the symbolic, as me, as someone who would be if I stayed here on this island and let the doctor, scientist, warden, dog get what she wanted and see me suffer. But she wouldn't. I had figured it all out, and I would escape, and the tittering, maddening, awful voice broke into my psyche with crystal clarity as I touched the hatch to the EMP. "You'd be the first," it giggled. "You'd be the first to go through with it. Come back and let us know if it works." I knew the voice was wrong. I knew they were cowardly, and I would be the first to escape. Still, my feet wouldn't move. I looked around the clearing at the dozens of eyes looking back, all with that horrible, cold smile and the endless low tittering, and I knew that all of them to the last was wrong and cowardly and timorous, and that if I just activated the EMP, I'd be free. One way or another, I'd be free. But what if? That is another EMP, the voice tormented again. Eradicated mortals portal. You step in and poof, you're gone. I step back. The tormenting voice joined by another inner voice. The voice the first EMP, the realizer, had given me. The voice telling me that the life of quiet penance was one worth living, that there was no honor in death. But that portal didn't lead to death. I am sure of it. I leave the clearing of tittering inmates and the freedom machine and contemplate on what I did. In my mind, I can see the whole, full life of the victim in a way that I would have thought impossible just yesterday. A way which likely was impossible. The thought is unbearable, and I shake my head a little to dislodge it. I haven't been walking for long, but I find myself at a cliff facing the sea. I wonder if the fall would kill me. Then the doctor scientist warden would be sorry. I reach my hand over the edge, and somehow, as if I already knew, it is rebuffed, as if by impossibly strong winds. The borders are not porous. They are well defined and insurmountable, except for one entrance and one exit. Looking out past the invisible barrier and seeing nothing but oceans, I still cannot tell if the island is natural. I'd heard of some places on Earth that took hours by plane in any direction to hit land. Natural. Ha! The geometry of it sure isn't. It is somehow perfectly flat and round as I make my way around the perimeter, with the center of foliage, trees, and rocks blocking the view of the EMP unless I dare enter the clearing again. Looking from one end to the other would lead you to believe it would take almost a day to bisect on foot, but I've circled around and around back to this spot on the cliff 5 times since leaving the clearing, and hardly an hour has passed. The cobblestone paths are all haphazard and intersect, but follow any of them and you are back at the bunks, the EMP, the mess hall, and the other few and far between buildings of necessity. For all the difference it makes, the barrier could be a one-way monitor and we could all be an attraction at a wildlife preserve. During my days, I sometimes pass the other inmates. They always smile coldly and tittle their little at me. They are judging me, and I care. My family thinks I'm dead, and I care. The suffering I have caused weighs heavy on my spine and releases just before it breaks, but my shoulders are not Atlas, and eventually it will break. I will give in and enter the EMP someday. As the weight of perfect guilt crushes me, I hope the day it fully engulfs me comes sooner than later, that I may escape this existing one way or another. What I did was wrong and cannot ever be righted. It is a cold finality for the victim and anyone he knew. It sent shock and outrage and fear throughout the masses that will cause undue suffering long past the death of any connected to the victim. The fear that society will never be perfect, but here I am, becoming the platonic ideal of a perfect citizen, a citizen of the universe, able to comprehend all these horrible realities and wishing more than anything to go back to the imperfect husk of a human I was, or forward to the unbreathing husk I will be. The weeks here have changed me. The circle around the EMP has grown wider by one. Each of us sitting in quiet meditation, all the same but for our exteriors. The cycle of thought repeating eternally, day in and day out, through all my waking hours. The empathy machined perfection is a portal back home, and I am now a safe and healed person. I can't harm anyone, and I've no desire to. The act I did was despicable, and I wish to make amends that I can never truly undo the damage. Returning would be a net good to humanity, I am sure of it, but if the Eradicate Mortals portal is indeed an execution chamber, then I will get off this endless suffering too easily. I won't have lived that quiet, long, meditative life that could amount to some small percentage of the suffering I have caused. This thought loop repeats, and I chuckle, falling one layer deeper into the Ouroboros of my mind. And each of the other inmates must be thinking the same, for we are all the same but for our exteriors, and we are all empathy machined perfection.